Good morning.
Now you can say good
Well,
morning.
Good morning.
that's a very fine intro.
How are you both?
The interesting thing in that intro, Richard may have known him as well, but the bit of the fearsome judge glaring at you with the side whiskers and a gavel. There was a judge just like that in my early years who sat at the Wood Green Crown Court, a dreadful man called Jartha Finney.
Yeah.
And he made our lives hell as junior barristers. So that brings back very unfond memories when I see that bit.
Oh dear.
It is odd because you look back on the times when you're a very junior barrister and you're aware that at the time you were quaking in your shoes, and in some senses you want to go back to those times and give that judge back what he or she might merit by way of a response.
Quite so.
When
you
you
yourself, no names, no location, but you've recently had very bad treatment from a judge who should know better, haven't you?
Well, I think I gave as good as I got.
I can imagine.
Yeah, it was a rather fraught 3-part hearing over the course of a whole day, where a judge just wouldn't accept what the law was.
Yes.
And I don't mind judges being unpleasant to me, but I don't like it if they don't know the actual law or bother to read the law when I point it out to them. But there we go.
Oh, and over a whole day.
And over a whole
As
day,
I understand it. You were meant to do a 10-minute hearing.
10-minute hearing at 10 o'clock, back at 1 o'clock for a further hearing, back at 2 o'clock for a further hearing. And
he just wouldn't relent, would he?
No, and at 2 o'clock, I had to say, look, I'm putting on record the following, and I repeated the law. And he knew what I meant by put on record. It meant I'm going to advise that we appeal you on this point. So that's why he put it on record. I went through it all, and he just completely ignored it all.
Yeah. Well, anyway,
we're not worried about that today.
In respect to
yeah. So what's the topic today, Philip?
Well, we're going to start with you because you are a very devoted listener of Radio 4.
I am.
And because you get up early doors to walk Jed, your dog, you often listen to the shipping forecast.
You've got to be very careful how you say that, Philip, and you broke out slightly in the middle of that word with S. But I think you said shipping. Yes, and what?
Yeah, well, as ever with you, the volume is a bit wonky.
All right, sorry.
Shipping forecast.
Yes.
And the other day, because you knew three.
You're a bit normal.
Did a tour last week.
You're a bit.
Yes, well, I don't know why. I mean, I got that.
I think the unfortunate thing
isn't it?
The unfortunate thing is that the providers of the internet have different standards, and it can go up and down the speed with which they provide it. And much as we have done our bit at this end, is sometimes it depends on your provider as to whether they're doing their bit. But we continue to try and override this problem. It's not easy.
I know for a fact that Philip goes up and down at different speeds as well. So that's not at all surprising. No, I think what Philip was alluding to was the fact that if you listen to the shipping forecast, in addition to the shipping areas, which obviously is the first bit of it, the last bit of it is what they call the forecast for the inshore waters, and one of those is Loch Foyle to Carlingford Loch, which is, as you'll know, Keith, the two extremes of Northern Ireland. So one on the Atlantic and one on the Irish Sea.
Right.
And every day, 3 times a day, if you tune into Radio 4, you can hear how that border, that very lengthy border, is doing in relation to weather. So I think we're talking about Northern Ireland today, aren't we, Philip?
We are, based on the route, if I could call it that you are alluding to, which is a series of lochs, Lough in Irish, starting at Carlingford Loch, which we'll cover today with Keith's help. We'll take a rain check on whether we carry on with this, but it finishes at Loch Foyle. So it goes Carlingford, Strangford, Nay, Upper Loch Earn.
Loch Ney's the big one, isn't it?
Loch Ney is the largest inland water area in the UK.
And the myth about it is that a Scots giant went over to Ireland to fight the Irish giant, and then the Scots giant left, and the Irish giant picked up a great lump of earth, thereby creating Loch Ney, and threw it at the Scottish giant, thereby creating the Isle of Man.
You are, as ever, spot on. That is exactly the legend. And then from Nay to Upper Loch Earn, and then Loch Foyle, which is just north of Derry, or Londonderry as we still have to call it, in particular a McGilligan Point. Now, Carlingford Loch is not strictly inland because it's actually a fjord. It's the only fjord in Northern Ireland, and it's 10 miles long. Carlingford village or town, and Keith will know more about this than me, is in the Republic of Ireland. But the loch, the northern shore of the loch is the beginning of Northern Ireland.
Indeed.
In particular, a small place called Greencastle, and that is where County Tyrone begins. And the largest town nearby is Newry. There's a place called Warren Point on the loch, which is used commercially for huge freighters. The name itself is, I am led to believe, Norse for the fjord of Carling. So that's the origin of the name. There's a very large lighthouse outside the mouth called the Hall Bowline Lighthouse, built in 1824. It's 112 feet high. And the other claim to fame is there's a little place called Ross Trevor, again, which I'm hoping Keith knows a bit about, which is where Joe Biden's family come from. And he comes to visit there once a year.
Keith,
So does any of this ring bells with you, Mr. Keith?
Oh, indeed it does. And actually, Carlingford is one of the favourite places that I know. It is, they built a bypass which cut the little village off from average traffic. And so it has remained a delightful little Irish town. And one of the things that you have seen postcards or in movies, the typical Irish pub, and O'Hare's is a typical Irish pub and a wonderful place to go to.
Sounds like a road
Yes,
trip
well,
to me.
throughout.
It is, well.
What was that, Richard?
I said it sounds like a road trip to me.
Well, you don't want to go much further than O'Hare's in Carlingford. It is you go in through the front door, and there is a tiny little place where you can buy potatoes and cabbages and sugar and so on. It's a little general store, very little, and then you move through to a very typical Irish rosewood and crystal bar. Once again, quite tiny. And then you go through into the long room, which has got a peat fire going and a rocking chair and so on, and where O'Hare himself stands behind the bar with the stomach of a landlord perched on the edge of the bar. He never smiles and regales you with stories about the leprechauns, which are up in the mountains. And he is the only one that is privileged to go to a leprechaun funeral. And to prove it, he's got a little glass case with a little hat and a little pair of trousers and a little jacket and some chicken bones, where he was permitted to bring one of the deceased leprechauns back to put in his bar. And it is a wonderful experience, a wonderful experience.
Well, as Barton says, a road trip is imminent. Now, you mentioned the rocking chair. Is Val Doonican in the?
I don't know that Val Doonican has been to this particular pub, although he should have been. I mean, it's become quite famous. Carlingford is also famous for its oyster festival. Yeah. And I'm very fond of oysters, as you know. And I went to this oyster festival, and I got some idea that what would happen is that people would they do it in the streets. That people would see how many oysters they could shuck in, and same as pronunciation, shuck is in X number of minutes or whatever. It's not at all. They stand in the middle of the oyster fishermen stand in the middle of the road with a little knife and a series of oysters, and they dress them. They open them and they then pretty them and so on. And a judge comes around to see who has dressed the oyster the best. and it's fascinating to see these very serious men standing in a row, opening oysters, and then tittering them up, really. And we all stand fascinated by this lack of action. It's marvelous, absolutely marvelous. I had more fun in Carlingford than almost any other town in Ireland. So a good choice.
Well,
Keith, I was just going to say, you mentioned Val Doonican, and I remember hearing him about his rocking chair, which he, was famous for sitting on when he was on the television, and he claimed, probably full of the blarney, that the only reason he got the rocking chair was that there was a female singer who had it, and when she was singing and rocking backwards and forwards, there was this squeaking noise, and the TV producers ended up saying, "Sorry, you can't use that rocking chair. It keeps squeaking." And it turned out it wasn't the chair; it was her bra that was squeaking. And Val Doonican, as you may recall, wasn't somebody who would normally wear a bra. So that's how he got the rocking chair, which was his symbol, wasn't it? When
very much so.
When he performed,
he was my maternal grandmother's favourite.
Oh yes, yeah.
As an aside,
favorite as well.
Richard's mentioned the word blarney. I cannot resist it. No names, no peril, but mine and Richard's ex-head of chambers, a very, at the time, well-known Irishman. I didn't realise it, but my pupil master, as they were called in those days, who I did my pupillage with, my apprenticeship, if you like, I actually met my to-be head of chambers, who had put on such a show at the Old Bailey defending that my pupil master, and of course at the time I heard this story, I had no idea who he was talking about. And my pupil master, John Jones, now sadly no longer with us, said to the jury in his closing speech, "Members of the jury, you've heard for many weeks now from Mr. X, my learned friend. Please remember, when you consider what he's told you, that when he goes to Ireland, the Blarney Stone kisses him."
Can I just say, you described the lock, which is quite actually magnificent, and you're right. It's not a lock; it's an inlet. You look across from Carlingford, and you see the Mourne Mountains, and the people who live in the Mourne Mountains are known as the kindly people of Mourne. And when you drive through, they just all wave to you. You go past these little croft cottages and they wave, and they really are kindly people. And you go off the main road and drive through just for the pleasure of seeing people who are of such kind and generous nature that they welcome you to their land. And this is a land that is riven by differences and violence and so on. Absolutely wonderful to go through the Mourne Mountains.
You are painting a picture of Carlingford and the Mourne people are idyllic.
Just about.
Yeah.
The one thing.
An old cynic like you wouldn't do that lightly.
No, indeed. I mean, it is my favourite place. One thing that might amuse you or worry you, I don't know, but they have a water course that comes down out of the mountains. So there's a fresh water that runs right through the middle of the town of Carlingford. And the ladies come out and wash their knickers in fresh water right in the middle of the street.
I do think, Keith, that you've been smoking something that you shouldn't have been smoking this morning.
You think so, do you?
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Tomorrow I'll be cynical again.
So what other experiences or landmarks can you recall of that area, Keith?
Of that area, well, I played golf down there, but of course there is the very tragic circumstance of as that loch goes in, it's known as narrow water. And that's where the IRA lured the British Army in the Ulster side, the county of Down. I forget how they did it, and then they launched an attack across the loch, and they more or less wiped out a whole platoon of the British Army. It was one of the nastiest incidents of the Troubles. So while there is, great memories of wonderful times, there's also a great tragedy of that area. The other thing is, Philip, and I hope you don't mind me sort of poking a little bit of fun, is there is a marvelous De Montfort castle there. And I would go up to the castle because I like castles. I like looking at them. And De Montfort is built this thing to last, and it's lasted. But from up there, you can look down on the loch, and it's almost like looking down on a sort of a little strip of water. And one day we saw a small warship, and somebody unkindly said, it's the Irish Navy on manoeuvres.
The poor old Irish. But I mean, what you've alluded to came across every morning in this last week, that it is essentially a very beautiful country with some wonderful people. But it's ridden. It was desperately ridden when you were there, but even now there is still this undercurrent of division and tension and fear.
Yes.
Almost everybody the presenter spoke to, they all, particularly in the Loch Foyle area, because with Derry, it was never off the agenda. It was always alluded to. And this expression of hope that the Troubles will not come back. But hey, it's a great shame.
I don't have any dislike at all for the Irish. I've got relatives who are very Irish. But they do have long memories, I'm afraid to say. And so, I've got a relative who married into an Irish family. And when they had their first son, they were talking about what they were going to call him. And he suggested the name Oliver. And it just got vetoed.
No.
Because it would be Oliver Cromwell. And
absolutely.
You not just leave that to one side, but
no. Well,
Keith,
he was a complete bastard to the Irish.
Yes, he was a complete bastard to a whole range of people, the Scots as well, kind of think of it. Keith.
In fact, I don't really know why my son is called Oliver. That was probably a very bad choice, thinking about it.
There we go. Keith, how do you see the border issue resolving itself?
I think it's an interesting situation. Of course, I have a daughter who lives there.
Yeah.
And my two grandsons were born there, although they've moved over to England now. But she and her generation said and helped partly to ease the terrorist situation by saying enough. We do not want the life of where we're afraid to go to restaurants, that we go to restaurants and find that they're blown up. We are afraid to walk the streets. We're afraid to go to the cinema. And as a consequence, what they've done is they've actually created a really very fine way of life, better really than we have over here in many ways. And they are saying to those who would start the whole process again is enough, enough, enough. We don't want to go back to those days. And what's really happened is that they forced the agenda to go political. Now, the politics are very interesting because for the first time in a long time, there is a majority of Catholics in the population.
Yeah. Exactly.
So one wonders what's going to happen at various elections. But by the same token, I don't think that that's necessarily going to mean a union, because in my time there, and I can't think that it's changed, is the Irish government, although the Constitution of Ireland says that they intend to make it the island of Ireland, the Irish government, being very pragmatic and practical, don't want the North because it would be too expensive. They would have to take over all the payments, social welfare, and so on and so forth, Medicare, and you name it. And that's a huge bill.
So you think
Yes,
that
yeah.
Sorry, Phil, you go ahead.
No, don't you please? You're asking very good questions. So carry on.
No. So your view, Keith, is that the border will remain the border for years to come. There won't be a unification of the island.
No, not in the foreseeable future. Now, of course, the thing is that what I've learned about politics is you can say and accept something on a Monday, and by Tuesday there's some politician that's managed to change it. I think if you got a firebrand in Taoiseach in Dublin, that they could easily change their stance. But most politicians, I found in dealing with them, is if you put aside the Provos and the other IRA splinters, the politicians are very pragmatic. And they understand is they can say one thing, but doing it could create huge problems for them. And the one thing about a politician is he hates to lose his seat.
I read this morning on the news that is it Don, the head of the DUP, has come out publicly to say that what he calls the stranglehold on the police service of Northern Ireland by Catholic politicians has got to end. Now, you will know more than me what that means, but he seems to think that the PSNI is now very pro-Catholic from the bottom.
Well, of course, the politicization of the police force is backwards and forwards. When it was the Royal Ulster Constabulary, it was very pro the Protestants, if you like. Then Patton, when he was, I don't know, was he Home Secretary or Northern Ireland Secretary or whatever, he changed it to the police Service of Northern Ireland, I think, isn't it? It's PSNI.
Correct.
And as a consequence, they changed its character. Yes, I think there was a swing towards, if you like, Republican sympathies. It is very difficult in Northern Ireland to be a member of the police force and not be swayed by the social group to which you belong. At the moment, it would appear that it sways that way, but it may well be that it'll sway back again. One of the things that is very interesting is I used to, for my sins, would write radio commercials on the side when I was there. And I worked with the agency that had the recruiting contract for the RUC. And they would spend thousands and thousands and thousands of pounds. And the people who ran the agency said, this is just to satisfy the public because out of this, we may recruit 10 or 15 people. Nobody wants to work for the police force. It's too dangerous.
Yes, I can imagine it must have been like that. It probably still is. Keith, you said to me when you agreed to let me do this lock thing that about 30 minutes would be enough because you have to think of other than us. I sense pretty much everything about Carlingford. Would you agree?
To be quite honest with you, I was delighted that you were going to start with Carlingford because I would urge anybody who wants to get to find the best of Northern Ireland and the best of the Republic to go into that area. Newry is a nice little town. Carlingford, you've heard me wax lyrical. The mountains of Mourne are terrific, and there are one or two nice little towns that are worth visiting in that area. The only thing is that during the height of the Troubles, that area was known as Murder Triangle, and it was not at all safe for anybody. My understanding is that it's changed considerably now, and that it's a good part of the country to go.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. Given that Richard, in all seriousness, has now got to work, and I think we've done coming up 35 minutes, should we call it a day?
It's up to you two gentlemen. We've got another 10 minutes before we hit 8:30.
Might I just make one recommendation that if you want to know a little bit about Northern Ireland in a comic way, Spike Milligan's only novel, Puckoon, which deals with people living on the border, as we've been talking about the border. And Philip, I'm sure you know this, I know that Keith would know it, it's an odd feature that in fact the Republic goes further north than Northern Ireland does.
Yes, it does.
On the west coast.
And on the west coast.
Based in that area. It's a very funny novel.
County Donegal.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
How are we spelling Puckoon?
As I say it, Puck, OON.
Right. As in Midsummer Night's Dream.
Yeah. And it's a novel in which the lead character, who's a sort of idiot, breaks the fourth wall a lot and talks to the readers. And I consider it to be Spike Milligan's best work, because he, as you all know, he took Irish citizenship, and was very knowledgeable about that area. And of course, the other
I must
thing,
confess, I didn't know I didn't know that.
yeah. The other thing is, Keith, and I think you could confirm this, that the actual border is a sort of zigzag thing, which covers many more miles than a straight line would.
Oh, it's the longest, one of the longest borders in the world.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes.
No, you're right. Yeah. And that was
I was
because
astonished.
Yes. Just if I could just go back to Donegal for a moment. In all my time I only went to Donegal about twice and for very limited periods of time. But the famous thing about Donegal is you go into the pub there and you say to the landlord, "What time do you close?" And he says, "Around November, sir."
Very good. Very good.
That sounds to be a Barton Meredith type of public house.
Yeah.
No, I was going to say I was astonished when I traced the Irish border on my map to get my bearings on this road lock trip. I was amazed how it's almost castellated. It's extraordinary.
Yep.
Yeah.
Talk about it. Well, it reminds me of the old saying about Welsh and Irish miles, because they just go on forever.
Well, one of the stories that is told about the farmers on the border on both sides of the border is that they would move their cows across the border, which was just down the road, and then claim a subsidy from the EU. And then they would move it back across the border, which is just a few miles, and claim a subsidy from the EU. And they would zigzag all day and make a fortune.
I think it was
That is so canny.
It was the commissioners who arranged the division who decided that, wasn't it? They felt the need to place people in the country that they thought was most suited to them, and hence why it does zigzag so enormously. And of course, it's now creates the post Brexit. It's a subject of lively debate, that particular border. But anyway, that may be for another day.
Yes.
Well,
actually,
the complexity of
yes, go on, Philip.
Yeah, sorry. The complexity of drawing that border must have been as complex as the partition of India, frankly.
Oh, yeah. Yes. Yes.
Yes. I mean, no border is ever logical. I mean, my mind went to Berlin when it was partitioned. You could get onto an underground and go through East Germany, although you couldn't get off the train. The borders are very, very strange things, and nothing logical about them. Incidentally, Philip, when we have finished our trot through Northern Ireland, which could go on for a couple of weeks or so, because it is fascinating, I would like to spend a little time talking about Rathlin Island. That's another fascinating place. And what triggered it in my mind was you talking about Loch Ness, where the Scottish giant threw it at the Irishman or whatever. Because Rathlin is, first of all, it's where Robert the Bruce saw the spider in the cave. But also, when the Scottish lords wanted to take over Ireland, they used to murder the people on Rathlin, And then when the Irish lords decided they'd fight back Scotland, they used to murder the people on Rathlin. The poor old people on Rathlin got battered around. But it's a fascinating place, not least of which became famous because the balloon the Virgin guy tried to fly up there. It came
Branson.
down there. Yeah. So
Well,
lots to talk
I'm
about.
very ignorant now. Yeah,
What
I will
do
go
you
along
mean?
with whatever
Philip,
you
what
guys
do you
want.
mean now?
Sorry?
All right. What I meant was momentarily ignorant because where is the location of this island? Are we Scotland or Ireland?
It is equidistant between Ireland and Scotland.
Oh, right.
Yes.
Got you. Didn't know.
Yeah.
Well,
And it is quite a famous one. And the only way to get onto it is by taking a fishing boat from either, I think it's Campbellstown in Scotland, and I've forgotten I should know it, but it's just gone out of my mind, in Northern Ireland. But you go to the fishing boat, and he sort of says, "Go and sit in the pub, and we'll let you know when there is a window of opportunity, because you have to wait for the gales to stop."
yes. Well, what I can tell you is that every day in this last week, it absolutely chucked it down in Northern Ireland. Wherever they went, they had to take shelter. And these lochs, they're not still and calm. They get a real foam and whatever you call it. They're not idle, but the inland ones anyway. But the weather was very inclement every morning.
I can well believe it. I can well believe it. My daughter hasn't reported in. She's so used to telling me that it was raining. she hasn't. She phones me about twice a week to give me a little update. She didn't even mention it this week.
Well, it sounded, I mean, I'm a Mancunian and I know about rain. It sounded horrendous, I have to say. However,
I can well
a
believe it.
beautiful country.
Oh, it is. It's quite spectacular in terms of its beauty, I have to say. Yeah.
Right, chaps, I'm going to have to go and get my togs on.
Okay.
Yeah, do that, Richard, and let's see what's
some of us aren't retired. You remember that. You've got to remember that.
to say that twice in one program is really pushing it, Barton.
Yeah, I hope so. Shall I say it again? I'm not retired. There you go.
Could I invite you to rearrange a phrase, one word?
Can I get one reaction from you? Can I get one reaction from you? This headline story this morning in the papers about rapists are going to be not allowed to do anything but the full term. What's your reaction to that?
I know people want that, but the difficulty is that you do need to give people an incentive to behave themselves when they're in prison. And so they know that they'll get a sentence. They'll serve either half or 3/4 of it, depending on, 2/3 of it, according to how long it is. And if they misbehave, then they come back. It also has the effect that if they serve the whole term and then they go out, there's nothing that the system can do to bring them in for anything else. So there's no monitoring of them in the same way that there is currently.
Yeah.
And yes, people are always going to say everyone should serve whatever. There was a chap in Turkey last week who was convicted of being a cryptocurrency fraudster. And let me just see if I can get the exact figures here. In Turkey, he got a prison sentence. And the prison sentence that he got was 11,000 years. And the prosecution were upset because they'd asked for it to be 40,000 years. And I think part of the reason for that is it's a sort of almost a religious thing, that if you're still serving your sentence, you will be in purgatory. You won't be, or equivalent, you won't be going to your heaven whilst the sentence remains. But yeah, I don't quite know what you do when you go down to the cells and you see your client and you say, well, that's the result. You didn't get 40,000 years. You only got 11,000 years. So, I think I did really well for you there. And I'm just hoping that won't happen to me today, but who can say? Anyway.
Are you on the internet? Are you in Lewis, or are you somewhere else today?
I'm both today. I'm in a remote court shortly, as I always am shortly. But then I'm taking a stroll down to Lewis to deal with something else. Yeah.
So Philip, what's your day ahead?
No doubt, because she's not at work, I'll be press considering my wife somewhere. Because I'm not working, there's little I can do to fill my day. But there we are. I lived in Lewis, I would be sitting next to you all day, quite willingly. But unfortunately, I don't live in Lewis.
Well, I think that we're going to have to get you to motor down one day a week to sit next to me.
Well, I wouldn't be against that, as long as my knee's okay. So which novel begins with the immortal sentence, "Call me Ishmael"?
We know that, Philip.
Well, you didn't on the text the other day. You didn't.
I did because I gave you a range of clues to the answer, because the answer is Moby Dick, and it was written by Herman Melville, and so I referenced the judge who has the same surname, and I asked you which coffee shop chain is named after a character in it.
Well, I didn't know the answer to that. Starbucks. Yeah, of course.
Starbucks is a character in Moby Dick.
I was going to say, I don't know one called Ahab's.
No, quite.
And there is, of course,
Thank you very much for an entertaining morning, as usual. What when I try to describe your program to people, but they pick it up very quickly, is they thoroughly enjoy the give and take between the two of you. but also they say they learn something every time they watch your program, which is it's a nice combination, and I thank you for it.
Not at all. They learn not to bother watching it another time. That's what they learn.
Oh, I think you're becoming addictive, like a drug.
Anyway, I'll see you in court.
Very well. Bye, gentlemen.
Good luck.
Oh, there we go. The two Bs, and as usual, entertaining as well as informative. We're going to take a little break now, and then hopefully we'll be joining Harry in France. I think he's back in France around about 10 o'clock. So for the moment, toodle doodle pip, I think. Yes, I think it is. Here we go.